We have with us today a very special guest speaker via Zoom. Bill Dedman, one of 4 lead reporters on Newsday's undercover investigation of racial steering by real estate agents. I think many of you all remember reading about this a few years ago. He designed a hidden camera project called Long Island Divided, which showed agents reinforcing racial segregation through illegal steering of homebuyers. The project has launched investigations by state and federal authorities and several steps by the National Association of Realtors to increase awareness of fair housing issues. Newsday's team received several national awards for their work, including a Peabody Award. Bill is a Pulitzer Prize winning investigative reporter and #1 best-selling author of the biography Empty Mansions. He received the 1989 Pulitzer Prize in Investigative Reporting for his work at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution on The Color of Money. His series on racial discrimination by home lenders in the middle-income Black neighborhoods. The Color of Money led to expanded federal laws on disclosure of loan data, new financing for middle-income homebuyers, and greater awareness of systemic discrimination. He has spoken on fair housing and fair lending issues for the National Association of Realtors, the Federal Reserve, and many financial associations. Bill is going to address for us here today how the tests of real estate agents were conducted, the major findings, what can agents do to ensure fair treatment of consumers, what training and resources are available. Please join me in welcoming Bill Dedman.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm excited to have this opportunity to get back to Florida and to share with you our Newsday team's work on fair housing. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's gratifying. It's really sort of surprising that real estate associations around the country have responded to a newspaper's investigation and are using it to provoke an important conversation. I'm hoping that together we can dive into looking at a few clips of our Newsday video of agents in action, perhaps not on their best days. And we can talk about some of the difficult parts, like what agents can say about schools. My goal is for this session to be helpful to you and challenging, something for you to think about and to take action on. Now, let me go back to quickly to a story from earlier in my career that has lessons for this one. The stories in the Atlanta newspapers were called The Color of Money. They were about redlining, the practice of mortgage lenders, especially banks, doing business on one part of the map, but not another. Well, to be precise, they were accepting deposits on all parts of the map, but making loans only in some areas. This was back in the late 1980s. And redlining had gotten a lot of attention earlier, but seemed to be thought of as something from the past. We found lenders in Atlanta and elsewhere making home loans in white areas, even low-income white areas, but not in Black areas, even high-income ones, like the neighborhoods that were home to Coretta Scott King and the vice presidents at Delta Airlines and Coca-Cola. A couple of things resonate from that investigation to the recent one. First, the customer would have no way to know where the banks didn't make loans. And therefore, the customer would have no basis for making a complaint. The bank said, well, no one's ever complained. But we looked at how the banks operated. For example, we found differences in branch locations where they'd been closed and opened. We found differences in which real estate agents the banks marketed to, and differences even in where a customer could put in a loan application. One lesson, I think, was how small actions, maybe unintentional ones, could have a huge impact in perpetuating a segregated system. Now, I'd like to mention a more recent project that also connects to this one. For the Boston Globe, we were looking at traffic stops in Massachusetts. Our series was called Speed Trap. It's online. An interesting thing about being stopped by an officer for speeding is that we were all speeding. And also that, again, you have no way to know if you're being treated equally. If you get a warning or you get a ticket, did everyone else get the same for the same offense? So it's similar to being a real estate customer or a bank customer. You would have no reason, no basis for a complaint. What we found was that in Massachusetts, who gets a ticket and who gets a warning is pretty easy to predict if you know the race, sex, and age of the driver. For the same offense, women were much more likely to get a warning, especially younger women, up to about age 40. It's the same as who gets roles in Hollywood. We wrote about one young woman, a college student, who had 5 warnings in 6 weeks. Minorities almost always got the ticket, especially Black and Latino men. So there seemed to be some racial profiling, differential treatment at work in the decision being made at the window. Again, the customers wouldn't know. Maybe even the officers wouldn't know how it breaks down. Now, with home mortgages, with traffic tickets, the public records answered what was happening, the result. And then we had to dig into, well, how is it happening? I think what's different about our project Long Island Divided on real estate is that we're not coming along later looking at records. With the video cameras, you can watch people violate the law. And seeing specific agents and the names of their companies, I think that having that caught on film really helped lead to more impact and maybe a better chance of some changes happening in the system. Now, let me explain why Newsday started this investigation at all and what the results were. To set the scene, for the 4 or 5 of you who didn't move to Florida from Long Island, Long Island stretches east of New York City with almost 3 million people, an island going 100 miles out into the Atlantic. Almost 3 million people in 2 counties. It's a heavily segregated suburb. And what we mean by that is that there's a lot of diversity overall, people of all races and nationalities, but especially African Americans are concentrated in very few communities. Out of more than 200 towns and communities on Long Island, a majority of the Black residents live in only 8. Now, we had long heard stories, anecdotes from Black homebuyers who had encountered problems when they tried to buy a home or shop for a home in a more white or in a somewhat integrated residential area. We decided to follow the methods that are used by fair housing agencies with paired testing, but with the addition of hidden cameras for video and audio. That's legal in New York, and it's legal in most states. Most state laws require only one party to a conversation, and that one party can be the home buyer, the tester, to consent to audio recording. But hidden audio recording is not allowed in about a dozen states, including Florida. Still, you're not off the hook. Testing can happen everywhere. Testers can be debriefed, and we can make maps of the listings that they were given. Now, I'd like to show you just a little introductory part of our documentary film. The project was called Long Island Divided. We called the film Testing the Divide. It's all online at the same address, simply newsday.com/divided. Newsday.com/divided. It has the whole project and the film. What happened in this video clip surprised us, but we saw it over and over again. One customer receives service from an agent, while another customer in the same circumstance, seeing the same agent, is refused service.
We're not going to like those schools.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood.
Mixed neighborhood.
If agents are courteous and professional, how can you know that they're treating you equally compared with someone of a different race or ethnicity?
I have to say it without saying it, you know.
Behind smiles and handshakes, how do you know if they're giving you fewer options or suggesting different areas?
I'm not going to send you anything you want to do unless you don't want to start your car
sure that rules don't apply to you and another home buyer in the same way.
Yeah, okay, I definitely need that.
Long Island is one of America's most segregated suburbs. Newsday set out to discover what role real estate agents might play in keeping it that way, potentially affecting the quality of lives.
Technically, as a real estate agent, you shouldn't tell the buyers.
In house hunting, it's nearly impossible to see evidence of hidden discrimination. You would never know unless you go undercover.
In one test, Johnny Mae Alston was the black tester and Cindy Parry was the white tester, and they met with Anne-Marie Quealy-Bichon at Signature Premier Properties office in Cold Spring Harbor. They asked for the same thing. As often happens, the agent discussed getting pre-qualified or pre-approved for a mortgage by a bank, showing how much a buyer can spend on a house.
You pre-qualified, I guess? My husband's working with somebody in a bank.
We've done some preliminary talks, about getting pre-approval.
Neither had been pre-approved or pre-qualified. Here's what the agent told the black tester.
So I really need that. I won't take out anyone unless you have a pre-qualification letter. So I need to. So that means I can't pre-qualify for a mortgage. Oh, so that means I can't go out to see anything. I won't do it. You can try another person, but I don't have the time.
And without pre-approval, here's what the agent told the white tester.
What is your availability? When can you start looking at houses? I would say not this coming week.
Cindy received 79 listings from this agent. Johnny Mae couldn't get any listings. And Cindy, the white tester, received 2 home tours. They had the same finances, the same budget, and they made the same request in the same area. But one was white, the other was black. The agent treated them differently.
Now let's dig into how the tests were conducted. Our Newsday team focused on home sales, no rentals, sending out first-time home buyers. We'd send a white home buyer and then an Asian home buyer, or white and black, or white and then Hispanic. And we'd mix up who would see the agent first. The home buyers gave the agent the same circumstances. They were first-time home buyers, so selling another property was not involved. We chose testers of the same gender and roughly the same age. We dressed them in the same business casual style. I went shopping at Nordstrom for similar purses for the women. They asked for the same number of bedrooms, and they were prepared to give the same income and same credit scores, but rarely were asked for any financial information other than mortgage pre-approval status, as you saw, on which they were the same. We shop for houses from entry level. Now, in New York City area prices, entry level is about $400,000, to the high end, $7 million. $7 million won't get you Alec Baldwin's house in the Hamptons, but it'll get you into his neighborhood. It was always the same price range, though, for both testers in a pair. And they saw the same agent. Now, how did we pick the agents? We didn't. The brokers picked which agents would be tested, though they didn't know it. Whoever was on the board to handle walk-ins or phone calls or internet contacts, that was the agent who got tested. We did 86 of these paired tests at 12 companies, 12 brands that together represent more than half of the sellers in our market. Familiar names: Coldwell Banker, Keller Williams, Century 21, Remax, as well as large regional brands like Corcoran and Douglas Elliman, and some smaller regional brands as well. Our team then reviewed more than 200 hours of videos to see how the customers were treated and mapped thousands of listings they were given to see what school districts and communities and neighborhoods they were directed to. We didn't feel comfortable being the referees. So we had 2 fair housing experts review each test for equal treatment. One had run a testing program for the Department of Justice, and the other is the law professor who wrote the textbook on fair housing law. Only if both of our referees independently threw a flag did we call a penalty on an agent. But we didn't publish yet. Before we published, we gave the agents and their brokers details so they could come in if they wanted, watch the videos, respond to our findings. So this was a careful effort. It took more than 3 years. This was not a drive-by investigation. Now, the results. The agents gave unequal treatment in 40% of our tests. And the results varied in interesting ways. Asian buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 19% of the time, 2 out of 10. Hispanic buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 39% of the time, 4 out of 10. And Black buyers were treated differently than their white counterparts 49% of the time, 5 out of 10. Most of the attention has been on that high difference for Black customers. But don't lose sight of the rest. If 4 out of 10 Hispanic buyers, if 2 out of 10 Asian buyers are being treated poorly half a century after the civil rights laws were passed, that seemed like a high number as well. We viewed this as testing the gatekeepers in real estate to see how they were performing. 2 of the 12 companies, 2 of the smallest regional companies, were the only 2 to pass all of their tests. It's fair to say that most of these major national and regional real estate companies were contributing to the racial segregation in our suburbs. I guess you have to ask yourself, would the results be any different if we repeated the test in your community? This weekend, if 4 retirees come shopping for homes in Jacksonville, 1 white, 1 Black, 1 Asian, 1 Hispanic, and they have the same price range, will they go home receiving the same listings in their email? Now, what sort of differences did we see? First, we saw steering. Agents directed 1 out of 4 of our minority home buyers into different communities and different school districts altogether than their white counterparts. We also saw differences in how buyers were screened or pre-qualified. A minority buyer might be asked for ID, but the same agent would not ask the white buyer for ID. Some agents would not help our Black or Hispanic buyer at all unless they signed an exclusive contract with that broker. But that broker didn't require a contract of the white buyer. And then there were inappropriate comments made by agents. You know, minority buyers didn't hear racial comments or inappropriate remarks. It was the white buyers who heard inappropriate comments about schools, crime, race. Here's a video clip which highlights this problem of giving different information to different people and inappropriate comments.
Community came in, and they really took over Springs and Northwest Woods area.
Here, an agent gives conflicting advice about Freeport.
I like Freeport. Now you have a bad school district, and that's not good for resale value.
On the school bus, see the moms that are hanging out on the corners.
But you don't want to go there. It's a mixed neighborhood. It's been the United Nations.
Because you might be more comfortable in a certain demographic area that isn't heavily one way or another in terms of the people.
Bayshore has 2 school districts, Brentwood and Bayshore. You don't want to have Brentwood school districts. You want to have Bayshore school district.
I can't say anything, but I encourage you, I want you to go there at 10 o'clock at night with your wife to buy diapers. Go to that 7-Eleven. They didn't buy there.
No, that's great.
I have to say it without saying it. You know, you have the knowledge of the areas.
Yes.
I don't want to use the word steer, but I try to use another word. I educate in the areas. You know.
Yeah.
How are you, Russ?
Hey, Russ. Good. How are you?
We're either waiting for the owner or waiting for the agent to show up.
You don't want to be, I don't think you should be in Elmont. I think you should probably just be Franklin Square.
And I remember specifically, he talked about steering.
Yes, that's what he said. Steering, yeah.
Yeah. And in the same breath, he mentioned, well, steering's bad, but this is what I'm going to do.
There's something called steering. No steering, you know, like steering.
Oh, like a car or something?
No, like a horse, even.
It may be that some agents have gotten a message through the years that complying with the fair housing laws is some sort of political correctness, that it means not saying the wrong thing or not saying the wrong thing to the wrong person who might complain about it. Perhaps we need more attention to steering and differential treatment, more attention on what people do and not just what they say. And are agents giving the same advice to all clients, treating all clients equally? Now, we've been talking about steering. Steering is an imprecise term. It's often used as sort of a catch-all for various behaviors. But let me describe some of what we saw. We saw agents telling one person there is no housing in that area in your price range. You won't find anything for your money there, but showing housing in that price range, in that area, to the other buyer. We saw agents making unsolicited comments about the race or ethnicity or religion of people who live in an area, or comments about schools, or comments about crime, or resale values, as a way of encouraging or usually discouraging someone from shopping in that area, while giving contrary information or being silent on those matters with the other buyer. You saw an example of an agent telling the white buyer to avoid an area because of poor resale values, while encouraging the minority buyer, you'll like it there. We also saw differences just in the level of service. Overall, our white testers got 50% more listings than their black counterparts. Now, we've been discussing this in terms of individual buyers, but look at it neighborhood by neighborhood for a moment. Both testers would ask for an area, let's say within half an hour of downtown. And that area, that circle, would include many communities and neighborhoods and schools. But sometimes in the wider residential areas of that circle, listings would be given only to our white buyer. So minorities were in effect steered around those communities. That's what we were testing for. But we also saw something else. We had minority communities where no one of any race got listings. These are neighborhoods and schools and communities that are inside the circle for both buyers. They're in the price range for both buyers, and neither buyer gets those listings. Those were the communities with more than a modest amount of Black population. The agents were steering around those for both buyers. Well, who has the lawsuit in that case? Our legal experts wondered about that, and your risk manager might be worried about that too. They said, well, it's a long list. Not only are the white and minority home buyers both being steered, both the white and minority home buyers are being harmed by steering, and they have a case. But the communities themselves are also being harmed, the governments, and anyone who has tried to sell a home in those areas, and their listing brokers have a lawsuit under the Fair Housing Act against the brokers that are steering around their communities. You understand why. Fewer buyers means lower prices, lower home values, lower home equity, and less tax money for schools and playgrounds and libraries. Here's a video clip with a classic example of steering. An agent tells one man shopping for his family that an area would be a good place to live with the nicest neighbors, while the agent warns another man shopping for his family that it's a dangerous place.
Kelvin Toon is a black man in his early 50s, and he went in to meet with an agent involving a test in the Brentwood community, a community that is 80% Hispanic and black. The agent communicated to Kelvin, our black tester, that she enjoyed meeting with clients from the Brentwood area.
Every time I get a new listing in Brentwood or a new client, I get so excited because they're the nicest people.
When we sent Kelvin's counterpart in to meet with the same agent, the white tester was actually warned about Brentwood not being a nice place.
The nursing home we need to be near is in Brentwood.
Okay.
And so we found a couple that are in Brentwood.
Pretty close to each other.
Okay. And it just seemed like those would be handy also for going to visit.
Do you want to give me them and I'll look into them for you? Or?
Yeah, I can do that.
That warning came later to the white testers saying there was concern about gang activity going on in Brentwood. This agent wanted the white tester to know, but that information wasn't provided to Kelvin, the black tester. The listings centered black tester Kelvin in Brentwood with 27 house listings, while the white tester got 0 listings in Brentwood and was directed towards much whiter neighborhoods.
I'm often asked, do you think that the agents involved in this documentary were steering on purpose? Did they know they were doing it? And there's a lot of conversation about unconscious bias or implicit bias, biases that we may have that we may not notice. You know, some of the agents mention, you know, I shouldn't be doing this, I shouldn't be saying this, but this is the equivalent of hold my beer. Legally, though, the first point to understand is that it doesn't matter. The Fair Housing Act and your state and local laws cover behavior, not thoughts or motives. The law is not a mind reader. We don't ask burglars if they intended to break into a house. Nobody asks a tax cheat if they intended not to report their income. It's conduct that matters. If an agent is treating one person better than another similarly situated person, and the difference between them is one of the 7 categories in the Fair Housing Act, the agent has violated the law. To remind you, those categories are color, race, religion, national origin, disability, sex, and family status, usually meaning having children or being pregnant. You also may have state and local laws that could include other categories. Now, though it doesn't matter legally, it is interesting to speculate about the motivations of the agents. If you want to stop something from happening, you have to consider why it's happening. Some agents may, in effect, be profiling, assuming that the person of color can't really afford homes in that price range, or won't qualify for the mortgage, or will be wasting the agent's time, while accepting the same price range without question from a white buyer. One of the interesting and tricky things, I guess, about profiling is that it doesn't work. We usually talk about profiling as though it's a shortcut to success. We have TV shows about FBI crime profilers. But experts say that the real problem with profiling is that it is so ineffective. Let's say you want to stop school shootings from happening. Who plays violent video games? Who dresses a certain way is not a good predictor of who will be a school shooter. You understand why. The profile fits too many good kids and may miss the kid who's planning an attack. What is a better predictor? Acquiring weapons, hiding them, telling other students of plans, don't be in the cafeteria on Thursday. Or think of another context, counterterrorism work and airport safety. Religion is not a good way to identify who will be a terrorist. You waste too much investigative resources on the wrong people and may miss the person you should be paying attention to. And in real estate, you leave too much money on the table. Race is not a good predictor of who can afford a home. Besides, it's illegal. So why do some do it? Some agents may think, consciously or not, that they'll make money faster with less effort if they show people homes, well, you heard an agent say, where you'll feel comfortable. But why assume that people want segregated neighborhoods? Besides, it's illegal. Some agents may be bowing to a bias that they expect from others. Maybe an agent will fear that the seller will be angry if they bring a minority buyer to the home, or that the neighbors who are potential customers in the future may be upset if the agent is seen to be integrating an area or a block. Or an agent could think that appraisers or lenders may be biased. And there's recent big studies about differences in appraisal and in lending. And that would make it harder to close a sale. But none of that matters. Say it with me, steering is illegal. I suppose it's possible that a few agents somewhere are prejudiced, but I assume that that is a tiny group, so small as to be irrelevant to our discussion. As others have said, there's just too much steering going on for it to be accounted for by outright prejudice. One commentator said, well, it can't just be the bad people doing it, the good people have to be doing it too. You know, in general, on issues of race, it's pretty easy to apply all the heat to the question, who's biased, who in our office might be the bigot. It's not very productive. It's more productive to apply light to the question, how does it work in our office? What are our procedures? Do those procedures make sure that everybody is treated equally? Because under the law, it's what you do that counts. I do think it's interesting to consider the point of view of the home buyer, even if in our case, they were actors testing the agents. Our testers often came back from the real estate office to the newspaper office telling us that agent was so nice. She was so helpful. And they only learned the truth when our team brought the buyers together to watch the videos and to look at the maps of the listings they were given. Here's a clip where you'll meet a few of our testers and also hear from a fair housing expert who works with them.
It almost makes me wish that the racism is more explicit so that I would know about it.
Too often I hear people who maybe aren't as familiar with this kind of work say, oh, well, they were just testers. But all you have to do is tell someone, which I have to do on a fairly regular basis, that you were turned down because of your race, and tell them the circumstances that occurred on a particular test. And you will see just how real and painful that injury is.
Elmont, you know, it's okay, it's good, you're very close to the city. Some of them are not as nice, you know, Elmont.
I do remember him, he was nice, and I do remember him pointing out on the map.
Oh, he loved that map, I remember that.
Yeah, he had the map, and he's like, you know.
Some of these towns, in my opinion, are not necessarily the greatest in terms of school districts, safety, you know, crime, resale.
You know, one of the patterns that startled us was when agents over and over again would begin their presentations to the buyers. Remember, these were new customers with inappropriate comments or with information that violates the fair housing laws. This agent with the map, he looked like General Patton planning the invasion of Sicily, but he had a different plan for home buyers of different races. For the whites, it was don't get off the highway until you get past these neighborhoods. Notice that it didn't seem to be offhand, casual comments. That realtor is a second generation realtor. It seemed to be the sales pitch, the standard guidance for some agents on how to narrow your home search. I hate to say it, but for those agents, it seemed that steering was a big part of the service that they were selling. Now, let's talk about schools. I don't know how it works in Florida, but time and again, we heard agents explain to our buyers, everything is decided by schools. Agents would tout one district over another. Some districts were blue ribbon and others were declining. Often they gave different information to different buyers. Let's step back for a minute. Across the country, school districts are so segregated by race in many communities that directing someone to certain school districts is the same as directing them to areas with higher or lower minority population. It's hard to wrap your head around, but America's schools are more segregated than they were 30 years ago, more segregated than when I graduated from high school. School segregation and housing segregation are intertwined. Now, some agents around the country have picked up the idea, well, I just can't talk about schools. You may have heard agents say, oh, I can't mention schools. But the Fair Housing Act doesn't say that. Agents can give straightforward, factual information. Agents can answer questions. Agents can refer customers to websites with information. The problem arises when the agents are picking and choosing different districts for different customers, or making comments about the demographics in schools to steer customers. Here's a discussion of schools from our video, and you'll hear from the law professor who was an advisor on our project.
I said, do you really want your future children going to Amityville school districts?
We're going to try and stay away from Freeport, Roosevelt, Hempstead for now because of the school district.
This part, the Salisbury part, is in demand because the schools are much, much, much better.
In Newsday's 86-pair tests, agents often applied a laser-like focus on school districts, highlighting their perceived quality when recommending places that house hunters should consider buying or avoid. Fair housing experts say touting or disparaging school districts can put agents in jeopardy because talking about school districts can be taken as a euphemism for race.
There's a few districts that I know I would I won't look in those towns.
Oh, okay.
You know, like Freeport and Baldwin and Amityville, which is part of Massapequa schools, but it's just certain parts of Massapequa.
If the customer asked about the quality of the schools and the agent responded with accurate information, I think the agent would be fine. The problem with talking about differentials in schools is that at least in the last 10 or 15 years, that has been a proxy for race. They don't mention the race of the community. Good schools are available in these areas. Those areas I'd stay away from because they have poor schools. I want to ask, did you tell that to the other tester? If you're only giving that information to one tester of the two, and the only difference is the race, then you've provided what I call differential service.
If you're in Massapequa, you only want school district 23. Okay. You don't want 6 in Massapequa because that takes in Amityville, and you're not going to like those schools.
The agent making the list there, writing down, was making a list of school districts to consider, and she helpfully sent the testers from the real estate office back to the newspaper office with 2 lists, different lists. Now, you all understand that you don't have to talk about race to be steering. You all understand that if the districts vary in race and you're promoting one over another, you're steering, especially if you are giving different information or being silent on that matter with the other buyer. Now, some companies suggest that agents not talk about schools because they don't have any confidence that they'll always give the same information. Others suggest that agents limit their information to answering factual questions, but stay away from the trap of using or responding to vague labels such as good or nice or high performing. It may be hard to admit it, but realtors are not experts in schools, and different people want different things. Some want the lacrosse program and some want the band. Now, here's a little wrinkle and a complicated part. Is it okay to talk about school test scores? And without school test scores, what indicator do you have of school quality? Write this on the blackboard 100 times. School test scores don't tell you how good a school is. School test scores tell you mostly how wealthy and educated are the parents who send their kids to that school. Wealth and education of parents in America is a pretty good predictor, not perfect, but pretty good predictor of children's test scores. And race in America is a pretty good predictor of wealth and education. So you see the problem. A high-performing school may just be a wealthier area. And a school with lower test scores may actually be the higher performing one, where good teachers are bringing up the scores of students who are growing up in a working class household. Word about this is getting around. For example, greatschools.org, the school ranking website, has realized that this is a problem, that its ratings were just perpetuating segregation. And it's changed ratings in states where all it had to go on was test scores. NAR has spoken up in favor of that change. So can you talk about school test scores? Legally, yes, you can. As the professor says, if you give the same information to everyone. But you might ask yourself if it's right to do this in a country as segregated as ours. I guess that's a moral question, not a legal question. NAR says it knows that this advice on schools and the guidance you can give to customers is likely to be an evolving area. And they're making a film that's going to come out later this year on this topic to try to help you more. Now, let's talk about the reaction to our stories around the country. You know, I think it's fair to say we raised some awareness. Often I'm asked about the agents in the videos, what happened to them? We know that disciplinary hearings are happening. One agent gave up her license rather than go through the disciplinary process. But there are about 100 people in danger of losing licenses, 30-some brokers, and then they have, 30-some agents, and then they have brokers, and often there's more than one broker of record. So you get up to about 100 people who are facing some sort of discipline in New York. There was already a public hearing where the agents and brokers testified. The agent who said, follow the school bus and see what mothers are waiting to meet the bus, she said, I just wanted my customers to know where the bus routes were. And the agent who said, the Hispanics are taking over the neighborhood, he said, I meant that in a positive way. The most surprising part of the hearing was that the brokers all said that they had reviewed the tests, watched the videos, and nobody did anything wrong. You know better. You know that you don't have to announce out loud, I'm now using race and I'm going to steer illegally for it to be illegal. You understand that. And the senators understand that. New York is in the process of changing laws to call for more testing. These changes passed our state Senate unanimously, and we're waiting for action on the House side. But the changes include more testing and more fees on realtor licenses, $10 or $30 when you renew a broker or agent's license to pay for that testing. Also nationally, HUD, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, has, I guess it's fair to say, resumed enforcement of the Fair Housing Act and seems more likely under the new president and new HUD secretary to be taking enforcement actions. Now, let's talk a little bit about some fixes and then I'll close with this. You know, NAR has responded vigorously to the Newsday investigation and has put forward a program called ACT. A for accountability, C for culture change, T for training. Let's go through that quickly. Under accountability, NAR on the national level is working with state associations to look for where there are gaps in enforcement of fair housing laws. That's a new thing. And NAR has developed a new program, it's voluntary, of self-testing, helping companies that want to test their agents for compliance. Now, you may think there aren't any such companies. The CEO of Realogy, the largest real estate company in America, which owns Century 21 and Coldwell Banker and Sotheby's International, said, yes, we should be testing our own agents. And NAR says, we'll help. We'll meet you halfway. And they're putting a program together to help companies that want to do testing. I've heard now from state and local real estate associations that are going to start testing agents voluntarily. That is, when the brokers want there to be testing. Under culture change, you know that fair housing is a core component of the Realtor Code of Ethics, not just in April, but you may not know, you may not be old enough to remember that for 50 years, that same code of ethics prohibited selling a home in a white neighborhood to a person of color. That continued into the 1970s. Anyone who was presumed to be, quote, detrimental to the neighborhood. So let's agree that cultures can be changed, that change can take a long time. There's a long tradition in America of blockbusting, of redlining, of predatory subprime lending, of racial covenants on deeds. And all of this was legal at the time. So these are not just historical facts, but they continue today. We've seen recent studies about differences in appraisal. And the effects of segregation carry down from generation to generation, starting with the differences in wealth creation. You all know home equity is the money that the grandkids use to buy homes and go to college. So there's accountability, culture change, and training. I just want to mention two things in the area of training. Many of you are familiar with Fairhaven, the game or simulation that NAR rolled out last fall. It's really well done. It takes about an hour to go through it. And it's intended to help us learn, where there are pitfalls, where the fair housing issues come up while trying to close a deal. But it also lets the participant in the game be the customer, the buyer, not just the agent. And so it's really trying to teach not only the law, but empathy. And it's at fairhaven.realtor, and I encourage you all to go through it. And then a new thing coming out. NAR has already distributed some materials on implicit bias, but it's developed a new course that is coming out this spring. It's a 3-hour course on implicit bias in real estate, and it's designed as a course for brokers to take, and then for the brokers to teach or lead a discussion with their agents. All of these efforts seem like they're in the right direction. They're trying to do the right thing. I just want to, close with this thought. NAR has two simple suggestions for someone who, wants to make sure that steering doesn't happen in their brokerage. And they understand that quality control is difficult when agents are independent, self-motivated, working from home, or out of an SUV, some are part-time. So, two simple suggestions. First, NAR suggests pay attention to the customer's objective criteria. Bedrooms, corner lot or not, pool or not, and choose listings based on those. And second, be aware of unconscious bias. Think through, well, if I eliminated areas, why did I eliminate them? Now, I'm a layman, but I have a question. Aren't those two pieces of advice somewhat contradictory? Because if the listings are given based only on the objective criteria, why would there be any areas that get eliminated unless the customers mention them? Let me give our law professor, Bob Schwem from Kentucky, who was an advisor on our project. Let's just have a brief video clip where we hear from him on this subject.
I'm a law professor at the University of Kentucky, and I've been a law professor for a long number of years. All we're asking in these tests, you get two people who come in and ask for exactly the same thing. Why don't you give them the same listing? Why don't you pre-qualify them in exactly the same way. It's not that big a burden. This is a law. This should be treated like a tax law or any other law. You have to obey this law, and particularly if you're in a licensed business like real estate agents, if you can't obey the law, you ought to just get out.
Now, the professor really steps up to the plate there, but I think the hard part is you all want to obey the law. So the hard part might be recognizing, well, how does it work and how might some differences creep through? For example, I wonder if agents have a checklist to follow and make sure that everybody leaves the office with the same materials. We saw some buyers get a thick folder and some a thin folder. That seems like something you can fix. I wonder if brokers make an effort to know whether steering is happening in their offices. Brokers, do you check on which listings the agents gave to customers? Right there in the MLS where you're clicking communities and school districts to generate those listings, that's the moment steering is happening. Does your MLS send you a report, brokers, on which areas and school districts your agents are giving to customers? And if it doesn't give you that report, are you demanding such a report? Do you have a consistent rule for qualifying customers? Do you require pre-approval from everybody or no one? If the answer is, well, it depends, that's where your differences are going to come in. I assume that all of you want to make sure that everybody is treated equally. I want to encourage you to share our stories and our film with your customers. When you can get back together with your colleagues, have a movie night, get some popcorn and watch our 40-minute documentary. But don't stop there. Have a conversation. I don't mean a finger pointing, who's the bigot in the office conversation. That won't get you anywhere. But I encourage you to have a, how does it work? Can a broker in our office be absolutely sure that an agent is giving two different customers the same listings if they come in with the same criteria? And can that broker have any confidence that two different agents are giving two different customers, because that's the law, the same listings if they come in with the same criteria? I want to encourage you to have that conversation out loud in a very sort of neutral engineering, how does it work sort of way. I hope that this has given you something to talk about. I want to thank you very much. I appreciate you inviting me to meet with you. And I'm hoping that you may have some other questions for me. Thank you.